Before you had a name, before anyone told you who you were, and long before you developed opinions, beliefs, or ambitions, you simply existed. There was no nationality, no political identity, no career, and no bank account. There wasn't even language. There was only consciousness experiencing the world directly. Then slowly the programming began. Every human being is born into a world that has already been constructed. The borders have already been drawn. The laws have already been written. The economy is already functioning, and society has already decided what counts as success, failure, normality, and deviance. None of us begin with a blank canvas. We inherit a civilization that was built long before we arrived. The German philosopher Max Stirner argued that many of the ideas governing society are what he called spooks. He wasn't talking about ghosts in the supernatural sense, but about invisible concepts that exist only because people collectively believe in them. Things like the nation, duty, honor, morality, reputation, and even success. They are not physical objects you can hold in your hands, yet they influence billions of lives every day. In many ways, these ideas become more powerful than reality itself because people are willing to sacrifice their lives for them. The first identity you ever received wasn't something you discovered, it was something that was assigned to you. You were given a name, a surname that carried generations of history, a nationality, a legal status, and a birth certificate. Before you were capable of asking the question, "Who am I?" governments already had an answer. You became a citizen, a future worker, a future taxpayer, and another record inside a system. None of this is necessarily sinister. It's simply how civilizations operate. But it's worth recognizing that our first identity isn't chosen, it's inherited. The next layer of programming comes from the people closest to us, our parents. Psychology has repeatedly shown that our earliest relationships shape how we understand the world. John Bowlby's attachment theory suggests that our first experiences of care become the blueprint for later relationships. Whether we feel secure, anxious, or avoidant often begins long before we're conscious enough to describe these emotions. Our parents don't simply teach us how to walk or speak, they teach us, often unintentionally, how to interpret reality. Their fears become our fears, their beliefs become our assumptions, their unresolved conflicts frequently become part of our own psychological inheritance. As Carl Jung famously wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it faith. Language then changes everything. It feels like language gives us freedom because it allows us to communicate. Yet, the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan argued that language also places us inside what he called the symbolic order. Before language, there are only sensations. Once language arrives, experience becomes organized into categories: good and bad, success and failure, normal and abnormal, us and them. We no longer experience reality directly. We experience it through concepts that already existed before we were born. In other words, language doesn't just describe reality, it quietly edits it. The same is true of culture. Most people never notice their own culture because it feels natural. We absorb it without remembering when we learned it. We learn how close to stand when talking, which emotions are acceptable to express, what love should look like, who deserves respect, and what a successful life is supposed to become. Anthropologists often describe culture as the invisible operating system of society. You usually don't notice it until you encounter another culture that follows entirely different rules. Suddenly, what once felt like objective truth reveals itself to be habit. School is where the programming becomes institutional. We sit in rows, we follow timetables, we ask permission to speak, we complete examinations, we receive grades and compare ourselves against everyone else. The philosopher Michel Foucault argued that institutions like schools don't simply educate people, they also produce disciplined individuals. Through routines, observation, and constant evaluation, we gradually learn punctuality, productivity, and how to confirm. Alongside mathematics and science, schools also teach something less obvious: how to function inside larger systems. As we grow older, another force begins shaping us just as powerfully: other people. Friends become mirrors. We learn what makes us accepted and what makes us excluded. The psychologist Albert Bandura demonstrated that much of human behavior is learned simply by observing others. Evolution made belonging essential for survival, so our brains reward social acceptance and experience rejection almost like physical pain. Without realizing it, our personality becomes something negotiated between ourselves and the people around us. Eventually, a voice appears inside your head. You call it your thoughts. But where did those thoughts actually come from? Modern neuroscience suggests that many decisions begin unconsciously before we become aware of making them. Psychology shows that memory is always rewriting itself. Emotions shape reasoning, and cognitive biases influence perception long before logic gets involved. The brain isn't simply recording reality like a camera, it's constructing a story that allows everything to make sense. Perhaps that's why so many of us confidently say, "This is just who I am." But is it? Or is the self itself another construction? That question has occupied philosophers and psychologists for centuries, and it leads us directly into the next stage of the matrix. If the first phase was about how your identity is formed, then the next phase is about what happens once that identity enters society. Because once you've accepted who you are, society begins teaching you what you are for. As children, we are often asked a question that seems harmless: what do you want to be when you grow up? It's an interesting question because it assumes your value will eventually be defined by your occupation. Rarely are children asked, "Who do you want to become?" Instead, we are encouraged to think in terms of professions: doctor, teacher, engineer, lawyer, warehouse worker, entrepreneur. Gradually, work stops becoming something we do and starts becoming something we are. The philosopher Karl Marx argued that one of capitalism's greatest effects is alienation. He believed that workers become separated from the products they create, from each other, from their own creativity, and in the end, from themselves. In earlier societies, a carpenter might build an entire table and see it become part of someone's home. Today, millions of people contribute only a tiny fragment to a process they will never fully understand. You scan barcodes, answer emails, write reports, or move products, often without seeing the wider purpose. The result is that many people spend decades exchanging time for money while feeling disconnected from the meaning of what they do. Of course, work itself isn't the problem. Every society needs cooperation. Food has to be grown, buildings have to be constructed, roads need repairing, hospital needs nurses, and of course doctors. The issue isn't labor. The issue is when survival becomes so dependent on participating in a particular economic system that opting out no longer feels like a real choice. To understand why, we need to look at one of humanity's most remarkable inventions: money. Money has no intrinsic value. You can't eat it, drink it, or build shelter with it. Yet almost every decision in modern life revolves around acquiring it. The historian Yuval Noah Harari describes money as one of humanity's greatest shared fictions. It's valuable because billions of people collectively agree that it is. Like language or law, money exists because of trust. If that trust disappeared tomorrow, so would the value. This doesn't mean money is fake, it means its power comes from collective belief rather than physical reality. Once you recognize that, something else becomes obvious. Nearly every major institution in society exists to manage the movement of this shared belief. Banks create and distribute credit. Governments regulate currency. Businesses generate profit. Individuals exchange time for wages. Taxes fund public services. The entire economy functions because people continue believing in the system. Most of us spend 40 or 50 years inside this cycle. We wake up to an alarm, commute to work, earn money, pay bills, buy food, pay rent or a mortgage, repeat the process, and eventually retire if we're fortunate enough to do so. For many people, this routine becomes life itself. The German philosopher Erich Fromm believed that modern society often confuses having with being. We begin measuring ourselves by what we own rather than who we are. Success becomes visible through possessions: the house, the car, the holidays, the clothes, and the latest technology. Consumption quietly replaces fulfillment. Advertising understands this better than almost anyone. Very few advertisements simply sell products, they sell identities. A watch becomes confidence, a car becomes freedom, designer clothes become status, a smartphone becomes belonging. We are rarely buying the object itself, we are buying the promise of becoming someone different. The French philosopher Jean Baudrillard argued that modern society increasingly lives in a world of simulations. According to him, symbols begin replacing reality. Images become more important than experiences, appearances more important than substance. We don't simply live our lives anymore, we curate them. Social media profiles become carefully edited versions of ourselves, encouraging us to perform happiness rather than experiencing it. In many ways, we are no longer just living inside society, we are living inside representations of society. And technology has accelerated this process beyond anything previous generations could have imagined. Every search, every purchase, every message, every location, and every click creates data. Data has become one of the most valuable resources in history because it allows behavior to be predicted with increasing accuracy. Michel Foucault once described the idea of the Panopticon, a prison designed so that prisoners never knew when they were being watched. The remarkable thing wasn't the architecture, it was the psychology. People eventually disciplined themselves because the possibility of surveillance became permanent. Today's surveillance often works differently. It's largely voluntary. We carry smartphones that always record where we go. We agree to terms and conditions without reading them. We allow website data to recommend what we watch what we buy, and sometimes even what we believe. Unlike the prisoners in Foucault's example, we have purchased the observation devices ourselves. None of this really requires a conspiracy. Complex systems don't always need someone secretly controlling them. They simply require incentives that encourage particular behaviors. Companies seek profit, governments seek stability, individuals seek security, algorithms seek engagement. Each part follows its own logic, yet together they create a system that shapes how billions of people think, behave, and consume. This system, or this matrix, if you want to call it, isn't controlled by one person. It's maintained by everyone participating in it. And this is where another uncomfortable question emerges. If your education shaped your thinking, your culture shaped your values, your job shaped your routine, your technology shaped your attention, and your economy shaped your survival, how much of your life has actually been chosen? This isn't an argument for rejecting civilization. Society has given us extraordinary achievements: medicine, science, literature, law, art, and great levels of cooperation between strangers. The very fact that millions of people can produce food, electricity, and healthcare for one another is one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. The question isn't whether society is good or bad. The question is whether we ever stop to examine the systems that quietly shape us. Because the most powerful systems rarely rely on force, they rely on normality. The moment something feels normal, we stop questioning it. And that's precisely what makes the matrix so difficult to see. If the system, or the matrix, is made from ideas rather than machines, then perhaps the first step towards freedom isn't escaping society, it's learning to see the invisible forces that shape it. Because once you begin noticing the code, it's everywhere. Take borders, for example. From space, there are no lines separating countries. There are no walls stretching across the oceans or glowing boundaries visible from orbit. Borders exist because humans collectively agreed they exist. They are maintained through laws, institutions, and shared belief. This doesn't mean borders are meaningless. They organize societies, regulate resources, and create political order, but they are still human creations. Nature never invented nations, we did. The same can be said for race. Biologically, modern genetics has shown that race is a far less meaningful category than history once suggested. The genetic variation between individuals within the same so called racial group is often greater than the variation between groups. Yet race has profoundly shaped human history because societies gave it meaning. Ideas became systems, systems became institutions, institutions influenced generations. Slavery is perhaps one of history's clearest examples of this process. No child is born believing another human being can be property. That belief had to be constructed, justified, and reinforced through culture, economics, politics, and law. Entire societies convinced themselves that exploitation was not only acceptable but necessary. Looking back, it seems unimaginable. The uncomfortable question is whether future generations will look back at some of our own systems with the same disbelief. History suggests they probably will. Throughout history, human beings have repeatedly built systems that felt permanent until suddenly they weren't. Empires collapsed, monarchies disappeared, colonies gained independence, economies transformed, technologies reshaped civilization. What feels unavoidable today often becomes a chapter in tomorrow's history books. And yet, despite all this change, one force remains remarkably constant: trauma. Psychologists increasingly understand that trauma isn't something bad that happened in the past. It's often something the nervous system continues carrying into the present. Experiences of neglect, violence, poverty, or instability don't simply disappear because time passes. They influence relationships, perception, and even biology. Research into intergenerational trauma suggests that suffering doesn't always end with the person who experienced it. Families can unknowingly pass emotional patterns from one generation to the next. Nations can do the same, so can cultures. Sometimes societies don't simply inherit wealth or traditions, they inherit fear. This helps explain why history continues echoing through the present. Immigration debates, political conflict, religious divisions, and national identities are rarely only about current events. They often carry centuries of memory beneath the surface. People defend ideas because those ideas have become part of who they believe themselves to be. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt argues that human beings usually don't reason their way towards belief. More often, we arrive at beliefs by intuition and then construct logical arguments afterwards. In other words, we don't simply think ourselves into identities. Our identities often think for us. Perhaps that's why disagreement feels so personal. When someone challenges an idea we've attached to our identity, it can feel as though they are challenging us. And so the matrix protects itself, not through violence alone, but through psychology. Every generation inherits a story about the world. Every generation mistakes that story for reality. Then slowly another generation comes along and rewrites it. And the cycle continues. Technology has only accelerated this process. Artificial intelligence predicts behavior. Algorithms shape attention. News feeds personalize reality. Two people can live in the same city while inhabiting entirely different informational worlds. The philosopher Jean Baudrillard warned that modern societies increasingly confuse representations with reality itself. Today, many people experience wars through screens, friendships through messages, holidays through photographs, and identity through profiles. The digital world doesn't simply reflect reality anymore. For many people, it has become reality. Perhaps the greatest illusion of all is certainty. We like believing we understand the world. We like believing we are independent thinkers. We like believing we are immune to propaganda, advertising, and social pressure. Psychology suggests otherwise. We are all influenced. The difference is whether we are aware of it. This is where philosophy becomes less about abstract ideas and more about freedom. Socrates famously declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. He wasn't suggesting everyone abandon society. He was arguing that without reflection, we mistake inherited beliefs for personal truths. Jung encouraged us to confront the unconscious. Foucault encouraged us to question institutions. Marx encouraged us to examine economic systems. Stirner encouraged us to challenge the invisible spooks governing our lives. None of them were offering exactly the same solution, but they were asking remarkably similar questions. Who is really thinking your thoughts? Who benefits from your obedience? Which part of your identity are really yours? And which parts were installed long before you arrived? Perhaps complete freedom is impossible. No one exists outside language, culture, or society. Every human being depends on cooperation. We all rely on strangers to grow food, generate electricity, build homes, and develop medicine. The matrix or the system, in many ways, is also civilization. The goal, then, isn't to destroy the system or the matrix, it's to become conscious within it, to recognize that your thoughts are influenced without assuming they are entirely determined, to acknowledge history without becoming trapped by it, to participate in society without allowing society to completely define you, because awareness changes everything. The moment you recognize that many of the rules governing your life are human constructions, they stop appearing unavoidable. Some deserve to be preserved, others deserve to be questioned, and a few deserve to be rewritten. Perhaps that's what freedom has always meant. Not escaping reality, but seeing it clearly. Because the system isn't a prison made of steel. It's a network of stories, institutions, memories, symbols, and beliefs that humanity has spent thousands of years building together. Some of those stories have liberated us, some have enslaved us. The future depends on knowing the difference. The next time you hear the voice inside your head telling you who you are, what success means, what you should fear, or what you should become, you should pause for a moment and ask one simple question: whose voice is it? And maybe for the first time, you'll begin writing your own code.